Hello and welcome back to The Gentleman Psychic. Welcome all. And as you know, I have to go right over here to my handy dandy Facebook and share all of these things. Let me see where we are. I never remember how to do that. Share, copy link. We'll go to the Facebook, The Gentleman Psychic. We will create a post. Join me live for story time. And of course, the thumbnail has me looking down, of course. And we publish. And then we go over here. Join me live for story time. Okay, well, that was fun. Good evening, Divinity Kitten. Lovely to have you. It is just now 10 o'clock, so we'll talk a little bit about what is going on in the world. Hello and welcome. I am really excited that next week I will be going to Salem. Well, not next week. The next couple of days, not Salem, Boston. I'll be in Boston. And that's really exciting. Hello, Christy. Good to see you, dear. So you can watch that. I've got live sci-fi. Not live sci-fi. Where's my mind today? I don't even know where my mind is. I have Nick's Haunted Diary, but it's the Magicus School of University. So that'll be fun. And hello, Adria. Lovely to have you here. We have just 3 people, but we're going to let 4. Hello, Amy. Good to see you. Oh, we have 6 people watching now. That's good. Good. Slowly building. We'll let everyone sort of come on. Let's see what I've got here. Oh, I had a missed call. I should probably take that call. When was that? Oh, it's 7:20. That was a long time ago. Hold on, I'm going to come. I have to send a message to this one. Sorry. Okay. I was in the middle of dinner when he tried to call me. Hi, Mary Jane. Good to see you. Okay, well, we've got a few people here. I wanted to show you, lovelies out there in the internet world, what I'm working on. This is the mother of all abominations. Oh, thank you, Catherine. I was just talking about that. This is Babylon 777. She is the mother of all, and I can't say that word or I'll get demonetized. She's the mother of all. But if you want to know more about Babylon, feel free to look her up on the internet. And that's Babalon. Anyway, I thought it would be appropriate. She's not finished yet. I'm still working on the 7-headed beast rising from the sea. It is not the Starbucks logo. It is, however, a siren with 2 tails, which is 15th century Italy. So that's what that is right there. Anyway, that's where that comes from. And now that we have people here, my loves, we can go ahead and fix my... There we go. That's better. Now, I will go ahead and continue reading for you. Chapter 27. We concluded our wedding tour rather sooner than we had at first intended, and returned to England and Willowsmere Court about the middle of August. I had a vague notion stirring in me that gave me a sort of dim, indefinable consolation, and it was this. I meant to bring my wife and Mavis Clare together, believing that the gentle influence of the gracious and happy creature, who, like a contented bird in its nest, dwelt serene in the little domain so near my own, might have a softening and wholesome effect upon Sybil's pitiless love of analysis and scorn of all noble ideas. The heat at Warwickshire was at this time intense. The roses were out in their full beauty, and the thick foliage of the branching oaks and elms in my grounds afforded grateful shade and repose to the tired body, while the tranquil loveliness of the woodland and meadow scenery comforted and soothed the equally tired mind. After all, there is no country in the world so fair as England, none so richly endowed with verdant forest and fragrant flowers, none that can boast of sweeter nooks for seclusion and romance. In Italy, that land so overpraised by hysterical posers who foolishly deem it admirable to glorify any country save their own. The fields are arid and brown and parched by the too fervent sun. There are no shady lanes such as England can boast of in all of her shires, and the mania among Italians for ruthlessly cutting down their finest trees, has not only actually injured the climate, but has so spoilt the landscape that it is difficult to believe at all in its once renowned and still erroneously reported charm. Such a bower of beauty as Lily Cottage was in that sultry August could never have discovered in all the length and breadth of Italy. Mavis superintended the care of her gardens herself. She had 2 gardeners who, under her directions, kept the grass and the trees continually watered, and nothing could be imagined more lovely than the picturesque old-fashioned house, covered with roses and tufts of jasmine that seemed to tie up the roof in festal knots and garlands, while around the building spread the reaches of deep emerald lawn and bosky arbors of foliage. There are all the most musical songbirds apparently found refuge and delight, and were at evening a perfect colony of nightingales, kept up a bubbling fountain of delicious melody. I remember well the afternoon, warm, languid, and still, when I took Sybil to see the woman author she had so long admired. The heat was so great that in our grounds all the birds were silent, but when we approached Lily Cottage, the first thing we heard was the piping of the thrush, which, somewhere among the roses, a mellow liquid warble expressing sweet content and mingling with the subdued coo-cooings of the dove, reviewers who were commenting on whatever pleased or displeased them in the distance. "What a pretty place it is," said my wife, as she peeped over the gate and through the odorous tangles of honeysuckle and jasmine. "I really think it is prettier than Willowsmere. It has been wonderfully improved." We were shown in, and Mavis, who had expected our visit, did not keep us waiting long. As she entered, clad in some gossamer white stuff that clung softly about her pretty figure and was belted in a simple ribbon, an odd, sickening pang went through my heart. The fair, untroubled face, the joyous yet dreamy student eyes, the sensitive mouth, and above all, the radiant look of happiness that made the whole expression of her features so bright and fascinating, taught me in one flash of conviction all that a woman might be, and all that she too frequently was not. And I had hated Mavis Clare. I had taken up my pen to deal her a wanton blow through the medium of anonymous criticism. But this was before I knew her, before I realized that there could be any difference between her and the female scarecrows who is so frequently pose as novelists without being able to write correct English and who walk in public of their copy with the glibness gained from Grub Street and the journalist's cheap restaurant. Yes, I had hated her, and now almost I loved her. Sybil, tall, queenly, and beautiful, gazed upon her with eyes that expressed astonishment as well as admiration. To think that you are the famous Mavis Clare, she said, smiling as she held out her hand. I always heard and knew that you did not look at all literary, but I never quite realized that you could be exactly what I see you are. To look literary does not always imply that you are literary, returned Mavis, laughing a little. Too often, I am afraid you will find the women who take pains to look literary are ignorant of literature. But how glad I am to see you, Lady Sybil. Do you know, I used to watch you playing about in the lawns of Willowsmere when I was quite a little girl. And I used to watch you, responded Sybil. You used to make daisy chains and cowslip balls in the field opposite on the other side of the Avon. It is a great pleasure to me to know we are neighbours. You must come and see me often at Willowsmere. Mavis did not answer immediately. She busied herself in pouring out tea and dispensing it to both of us. Lady Sybil, who was always on alert for glimpses of character, noticed that she did not answer the repeated her words coaxingly. You will come, will you not? As often as you like. The oftener the better. We must be friends, you know. Mavis looked up then, a frank, sweet smile in her eyes. Do you really mean it? She asked. Mean it? Echoed Sybil. Why, of course I do. How can I doubt it? I exclaimed. How can you doubt it? I exclaimed. Well, you must both forgive me for asking such a question, said Mavis, still smiling. But you see, you are now among what is called the county magnates, and county magnates consider themselves infinitely above all authors. She laughed outright, and her blue eyes twinkled with fun. I think many of them estimate writers of books as some sort of strange outgrowth of humanity that is barely decent. It is deliciously funny and always amuses me. Nevertheless, among my many faults, the biggest one is, I fancy, pride, and a dreadfully obstinate spirit of independence. Now, tell you the truth, I have been asked by many so-called great people to their houses, and when I have gone, I have generally been sorry for it afterwards. Why? I asked. They honor themselves by inviting you. Oh, I don't think they take it in that way at all, she replied, shaking her fair head demurely. They fancy they have performed a great act of condescension, whereas it really is I who condescended, for it is very good of me to know to leave the society of the Palace Athene in my study for that of the flounced and frizzled lady of fashion. Her bright smile again irradiated her face, and she went on. Once I was asked to luncheon with a certain baron and baroness who invited a few guests to meet me. So they said. I was not introduced to more than one or two of these people. The rest sat and stared at me as if I were a new kind of fish or fowl. When the baron showed me his house and told me of the price of his pictures and his china, he was even good enough to explain which was the Dresden and which was Delft ware. Though, I believe, benighted author as I am, I could have instructed him equally on these and other matters. However, I managed to smile amicably through the whole programme and professed myself charmed and delighted in the usual way. But they never asked me to visit them again, and, unless indeed they wanted me to be impressed with their furniture catalogue, I can never make out what I did to be asked at all, and what I have done never to have been asked any more. They must have been parvenus, said Sybil indignantly. No well-bred people would have priced their goods to you unless they happened to be Jews. Mavis laughed, a merry little laugh like a peal of bells. Then she continued, Well, I will not say who they are. I must keep something for my literary reminiscences when I get old. Then all these people will be named and go down to posterity as Dante's enemies went down to Dante's hell. I have only told you the incident just to show you why I asked if you meant it when you invited me to visit you at Willowsmere, because the Baron and Baroness I have spoken of gushed over me and my poor books to such an extent that you would have fancied I was to be for every one of their dearest friends, and they didn't mean it. Other people I know embrace me effusively and invite me to their houses, and they don't mean it. And when I find out these shams, I like to make it very clear on my own side that I do not seek to be embraced or invited, and that if certain great folks deem it a favor to ask me to their houses, I do not consider it, but rather think the favor is entirely on my part should I accept the invitation. And I do not say this for my own self at all. Self has nothing to do with it, but I do say it and strongly assert it for the sake of the dignity of literature as an art and profession. If few other authors would maintain this position, we might raise the standard of letters by degrees to what it was in the old days of Scott and Byron. I hope you do not think me to be proud. On the contrary, I think you are quite right, said Sybil, earnestly, and I admire you for your courage and independence. Some of the aristocracy are, I know, such utter snobs that often I feel ashamed to belong to them. But as far as we are concerned, I can only assure you that if you will honor us by becoming our friend as well as our neighbor, you shall not regret it. Do try and like me if you can. She bent toward with a witching smile on her face. Mavis looked at her seriously and admiringly. How beautiful you are, she said frankly. Everybody tells you this, of course. Still, I cannot help joining in the general chorus. To me, a lovely face is like a lovely flower. I must admire it. Beauty is quite a divine thing, and though I am often told that plain people are always the good people, I never can quite believe it. Nature is surely bound to give beautiful face to a beautiful spirit. Sybil, who had smiled with pleasure at the first words of the open compliment, paid her by one of the most gifted of her own sex, now flushed deeply. Not always, Miss Clare, she said, veiling her brilliant eyes beneath the droop of her long lashes. One can imagine a fair fiend as easily as a fair angel. True, and Mavis looked at her musingly. Then suddenly, laughing in her blithe, bright way, she added, quite true. Really, I cannot picture an ugly fiend, for the fiends are supposed to be immortal, and I am convinced that immortal ugliness has no part in the universe. Downright hideousness belongs to humanity alone. And an ugly face is such a blot on creation that we can only console ourselves by the reflection that is fortunately perishable, and that in course of time the soul behind it will be released from its ill-formed husk, and will be allowed to wear a fairer aspect. Yes, Lady Sybil, I will come to Willowsmere. I cannot refuse to look upon such loveliness as yours as often as I may. You are a charming flatterer, said Sybil, rising and putting an arm round her in that affectionate, coaxing way of hers, which seemed to be so sincere, and which so frequently meant nothing. But I confess, I prefer to be flattered by a woman rather than a man. Men say the same things to all women. They have a very limited repertoire of compliments, and they will tell a fright she is beautiful, if it happens to serve their immediate purpose. But women themselves exist either inward or outward in one another, that when they do say a kind or generous thing of their own sex, it is a wonder worth remembering. May I see your study? Mavis willingly assented, and we all three went into the peaceful sanctum where the marble palace presided, and where the dogs Tricky and Emperor were both ensconced. emperor sitting up on his haunches and surveying the prospect from the window, and Trixie, with the most absurd air of importance, imitating the larger animal's attitude precisely at a little distance off. Sorry, I wanted to check something here. Okay. Both creatures were friendly to my wife and to me, and while Sybil was stroking the St. Bernard's massive head, Mavis said suddenly, "Where is the friend who came with you here first? Prince Ramirez." "He is in St. Petersburg just now," I answered, "but he will be here in 2 or 3 weeks to stay with us, on a visit for some time." "He is surely a very singular man," said Mavis thoughtfully. "Do you remember how strangely my dogs behaved to him? Emperor was quite restless and troublesome for 2 or 3 hours after he had gone." And in a few words, she told Sybil the incident of the St. Bernard's attack upon Lucio. "Some people have a natural antipathy to dogs," said Sybil, as she heard, "and the dogs always find it out and resent it. But I should not have thought Prince Ramirez had any antipathy to any creatures, excepting for women." And she laughed a trifle bitterly. "Except women," echoed Mavis surprisedly. "Does he hate women? He must be a very good actor then, for to me he was wonderfully kind and gentle." Sybil looked at her intently and was silent for a minute. Then she said, "Perhaps it is because he knows you are unlike the ordinary run of women, and have nothing in common with their usual trumpery aims. Of course, he is always courteous to our sex, but I think it is easy to see that his courtesy is often worn as mere mask to cover a very different feeling." "You have perceived that, then, Sybil?" I said with a slight smile. "I should be blind if I had not perceived it," she replied. "I do not, however, blame him for his pet aversion. I think it makes him all the more attractive and interesting." "He's a great friend of yours?" inquired Mavis, looking at me as she put the question. "The very greatest friends I have," I replied quickly. "I owe him more than I can ever repay. Indeed, I have to thank him even for introducing me to my wife." I said the words unthinkingly and playfully, but as I uttered them, a sudden shock affected my nerves, a shock of painful memory. Yes, it was true. I owed to him, to Lucio, the misery, fear, degradation, and shame of having such a woman as Sybil united to me till death do us part. I felt myself turning sick and giddy, and I sat down in one of the quaint oak chairs that helped to furnish Mavis Clare's study, allowing the two women to pass out of the open French window into the sunlit garden together. The dogs followed at their heels. I watched them as they went, my wife, tall and stately, attired in the newest and most fashionable mode, Mavis, small and slight, with a soft white gown and floating ribbon waist, the one sensual, the other spiritual, the one base and vicious and desire, the other pure-souled and aspiring to noblest ends, the one a physically magnificent animal, the other merely sweet-faced and ideally fair like a sylph of the woodlands. And looking, I clenched my hands, as I thought with bitterness of the spirit, what a mistaken choice I had made. In the profound egotism which had always been my part of nature, I now actually allowed myself to believe that I might, had I chosen, have wedded Mavis Clare, never for one moment imagining that all my wealth would have been useless to me in such a quest, and that I might as well have proposed to pluck a star from the sky as to win a woman who is able to read my nature thoroughly, and who would never have come down to my money level from her intellectual throne. No, not though I had been a monarch of many nations. I stared at the large, tranquil features of Phallus Athene, and the blank eyeballs of the marble goddess appeared to regard me in turn with impressive scorn. I glanced round the room, and at the walls adorned with the wise sayings of poets and philosophers, sayings that reminded me of truths which I knew yet never accepted as practicable. And presently my eyes were attracted to a corner near the writing desk, which I had not noticed before, where there was a small dim lamp burning. Above this lamp, an ivory crucifix gleamed white against the draperies of dark purple velvet. Below it, on a silver bracket, was an hourglass, through which the sand was running in glistening grains, and round the entitled shrine was written in letters of gold, "Now is the acceptable time," the word "now" being in larger characters than the rest. Now was evidently Mavis's motto, to lose no time, but to work, to pray, to love, to hope, to thank God, to be glad for life, all in the now, and neither to regret the past nor forebode the future, but simply do the best that could be done, and leave all else in childlike confidence to the divine will. I got up restlessly. The sight of the crucifix curiously annoyed me, and I followed the path my wife and Mavis had taken to the garden. I found them looking in at the cage of the Anthium owls, the owl in chief being, as usual, puffed out with his own importance and swelling visibly with indignation and excess of feather. Sybil turned to me as she saw. Her face was bright and smiling. "Miss Clare was very strong opinions of her own, Geoffrey," she said. "She is not as much captivated by Prince Ramirez as most people are. In fact, she has just confided to me that she does not quite like him." Mavis blushed, but her eyes met mine with fearless candor. "It is wrong to say what one thinks, I know," she murmured in somewhat troubled accents, "and is dreadful fault of mine. Please forgive me, Mr. Tempest. You tell me the prince is your greatest friend, and I assure you I was immensely impressed by his appearance when I first saw him. But afterwards, after I had studied him a little, the conviction was borne in upon me that he was not altogether what he seemed." "That is exactly what he says of himself," I answered, laughing a little. "He has a mystery, I believe, and he had promised to clear it up for me some day. But I'm sorry you don't like him, Miss Clare. He likes you." "Perhaps when I meet him again, my ideas may be different," said Mavis gently. "At present, well, do not let us talk of it any more. Indeed, I feel I have been very rude to express any opinion at all concerning one for whom you and Lady Sybil have so great a regard. But somehow I seemed impelled, almost against my will, to say what I did just now." Her soft eyes looked pained and puzzled, and to relieve her and change the subject, I asked if she was writing anything new. "Oh, yes," she replied. It would never do for me to be idle. The public are very kind to me, and no sooner have they read one thing of mine, they can clamor for another, so I am kept very busy." "And what about the critics?" I asked with a good deal of curiosity. She laughed. "I never pay the least attention to them," she answered, "except when they are hasty and misguided enough to write lies about me. Then I very naturally take the liberty to contradict those lies, either through my own statement or that of which the lawyers, apart from refusing to allow the public to be led into false notion of my own works and aims. I have no grudge whatever against the critics. They are generally very poor, hard-working men, and have a frightful struggle to live. I have often, privately, done some of them good turn without their knowledge. A publisher of mine sent me an MS the other day by one of the deadliest enemies of the press, and stated that my opinion would decide its rejection or acceptance. I read it through, and though it was not very brilliant work, it was good enough, so I praised it as warmly as I could, and urged its publication, with the stipulation that the author should never be told I had had the casting vote. It has just come out, I see, and I hope it will succeed." Here she paused to gather a few deep damask roses, which she handed to Sybil. "Yes, critics are very badly, even cruelly paid," she went on musingly. "It is not to be expected that they should write eulogies of the successful author while they continue unsuccessful. Such work could not be anything but gall and wormwood to them. I know the poor little wife of one of them, and settled her dressmaker's bill for her because she was afraid to show it to her husband. The very week afterwards, he slashed away at my last book in the most approved style in the paper, on which he is employed, and got, I suppose, about a guinea for his trouble. Of course, he didn't know about his little wife and her dunning dressmaker, and he never will know, because I have bound her over to secrecy. But why do you do such things? Asked Sybil, astonished. I would have let his wife get into the county court for her bill if I had been you. Would you? Said Mavis, who smiled gravely. Well, I could not. You know what it was that it was said, bless them that curse you, and do good to them that hate you. Besides, the poor little woman was frightened to death at her own expenditure. It is pitiful, you know, to see the helpless agonies of people who will live beyond their incomes. They suffer much more than the beggars in the street, who make frequently more than £1 a day by mere whining and snivelling. The critics are much more an evil case than beggars. Few of them make even £1 a day, and of course they regarded as natural enemies the authors who make £30 to £50 a week. I assure you, I am very sorry for critics all round. They are the least regarded and worst rewarded of all of it, little literary community. And I never bother myself at all about them, what they say of me, except, as I before observed, when they in their haste tell lies. Then, of course, it becomes a necessity for me to state the truth in simple self-defiance, as well as by way of duty to my public. But as a rule, I hand over all my press notices to Trixie there, indicating the minute Yorkshire Terrier who followed closely at the edge of her white gown, and he tears them to indistinguishable shreds in about 3 minutes. She laughed merrily, and Sybil smiled, watching her with the same wonder and admiration that had been expressed in her looks, more or less since the beginning of our interview with this light-hearted possessor of literary fame. We were now walking towards the gate, preparatory to taking our departure. May I come and talk to you sometimes? My wife said suddenly, in her prettiest and most pleading voice. It would be such a privilege. You can come whenever you like in the afternoons, replied Mavis readily. The mornings belong to a goddess more dominant even than beauty, work. You never work at night? I asked. Indeed, no. I never turned the ordinance of nature upside down, as I am sure I should get the worst of it if I made such an attempt. The night is for sleep, and I use it, thankfully, for that blessed purpose. Some authors can only write at night, though, I said. Then you may be sure they only produce blurred pictures and indistinct characterization, said Mavis. Some I know there are who invite inspiration through gin or opium as well as through the midnight influences, but I do not believe in such methods. Morning and freshly rested brain are required for literary labor. That is, if one wants to write a book that will last for more than one season. She accompanied us to the gate and stood under the porch, her dog beside her and the roses waving high over her head. At any rate, work agrees with you, said Sybil, fixing upon her long, intent, almost envious gaze. You look perfectly happy. I am perfectly happy, she answered, smiling. I have nothing in all the world to wish for except that I may die as peacefully as I have lived. May that day be far distant, I said earnestly. She raised her soft, meditative eyes to mine. Thank you, she responded gently, but I do not mind when it comes, so long as it finds me ready. She waved her hand to us as we left her and turned the corner of the lane, and for some minutes we walked on slowly in absolute silence. Then, at last, Sybil spoke. I quite understand the hatred there is in some quarters for Mavis Clare, she said. I am afraid I began to hate her myself. I stopped and stared at her, astonished and confounded. You began to hate her? You? And why? Are you so blind that you cannot perceive why? She retorted, the little malign smile I knew so well playing round her lips. Because she is happy. because she has no scandals in her life, and because she dares to be content. One longs to make her miserable, but how to do it? She believes in a God. She thinks all he ordains is right and good. With such a firm faith as that, she would be happy in a garret, earning but a few pence a day. I see now perfectly how she has won her public. It is by the absolute conviction she has herself of the theories of life she tries to instill. What can be done against her? Nothing. But I understand why the critics would like to quash her. If I were a critic fond of whiskey and soda and music hall women, I should like to quash her myself for being so different to the rest of her sex. What an incomprehensible woman you are, Sybil, I exclaimed with real irritation. You admire Miss Clare's books. You have always admired them. You have asked her to become your friend, and almost in the same breath you aver you would like to quash her to make her miserable. I confess I cannot understand you. Of course you cannot, she responded tranquilly, her eyes resting upon me with curious expression as we paused for an instant under the deep shade of a chestnut tree before entering our own grounds. I never supposed you could, and unlike the ordinary femme incomprise, I have never blamed you for your want of comprehension. It has taken me some time to understand myself, and even now I am not quite sure that that I've gauged the depths or shallowness of my own nature correctly. But on this matter of Mavis Clare, can you not imagine that badness may hate goodness? That the confirmed drunkard may hate the sober citizen? That the outcast may hate the innocent maiden? And that it is possible that I, reading life as I do, and finding it loathsome in many of its aspects, distrusting men and women utterly, and being destitute of any faith in God, may hate, yes, hate. And she clenched her hand on a tuft of drooping leaves and scattered the green fragments at her feet. A woman who finds life beautiful and God existence, who takes no part in our social shams and slanders, and who, in place of my self-torturing spirit of analysis, has secured an enviable fame and the honor of thousands, allied to a serene content. Why, it would be something worth living for to make such a woman wretched for once in her life. But as she is constituted, it is impossible to do it. She turned from me and walked slowly onward, I following in a pained silence. If you do not mean to be her friend, you should tell her so, I said presently. You heard what she said about protestations of regard. I heard, she replied morosely. She is a clever woman, Geoffrey, and you may trust her to find me out without any explanation. As she said this, I raised my eyes and looked full at her. Exceedingly beautiful, her exceeding beauty was becoming almost an agony to my sight. And in a sudden fool's paroxysm of despair, I exclaimed, "Oh, Sybil, Sybil, why were you made as you are?" "Oh, why indeed," she rejoined with a faint mocking smile. "And why, being made as I am, was I born an earl's daughter? If I had been an Arab of the street, I should have been in my proper place, and novels would have been written about me, and plays, and I might have become such a heroine as should cause all good men to weep for joy, because of my generosity in encouraging their vices. But an earl's daughter, respectably married to a millionaire. I am a mistake of nature, yet nature does make mistakes sometimes, Geoffrey. And when she does, they are generally irredeemable." We had now reached our own grounds, and I walked in miserable mood beside her across the lawn towards the house. "Sybil," I said at last, "I had hoped you and Mavis Clare might be friends." She laughed. "So, we shall be friends, I dare say, for a little while," she replied. "But the dove does not willingly consort with the raven, and Mavis Clare's way of life and studious habits would be to me insufferably dull." Besides, as I said before, she, as a clever woman and a thinker, is too clear-sighted not to find me out in some course of time. But I will play the humbug as long as I can. If I perform the part of the country lady or patron of of course, she won't stand me for a moment. I shall have to assume a much more difficult role, that of an honest woman. Again she laughed a cruel little laugh that chilled my blood and paced slowly into the house through the open windows of the drawing-room. And I, left alone in the garden among the nodding roses and waving trees, felt that the beautiful domain of Willowsmere had suddenly grown hideous and bereft of all of its former charm, and was nothing but a haunted house of desolation, haunted by an all-dominant and ever-victorious spirit of evil. Chapter 28. One of the strangest things in all the strange course of our human life is perhaps the sadness of certain unlooked-for events which in a day or even an hour may work utter devastation where there has been more or less peace, and hopeless ruin where there has been comparative safety. Like the shock of an earthquake, the clamorous incidents thunder in on the regular routine of ordinary life, crumbling down our hopes, breaking our hearts, and scattering our pleasures into the dust and ashes of despair. And this kind of destructive trouble generally happens in the midst of the apparent prosperity, without the least warning, and with all the abrupt fierceness of the desert storm. It is constantly made manifest to us the unexpected and almost instantaneous downfall of certain members of society, who have held their heads proudly above their compeers, and have presumed to pose as examples of light and leading to the whole community. We see it in the capricious fortunes of kings and statesmen, who are in favor one day and disgraced the next, and vast changes are wrought with such inexplicable quickness that is scarcely wonderful to hear of certain religious sects who, when everything is prospering more than usually well with them, make haste to put on garments of sackcloth and cast ashes on their heads, praying aloud, "Prepare us, O Lord, for evil days which are at hand." The moderation of the Stoics, who considered it impious to either rejoice or grieve, and strove to maintain an equable middle course between the opposing elements of sorrow and joy, without allowing themselves to be led away by overt and delight and overmuch melancholy, was surely a wise habit of temperament. I, who lived miserably as far as my inner and better consciousness was concerned, was yet outwardly satisfied with the material things of life, the luxuries surrounding me, and I began to take comfort in these things, and with them endeavored to quell and ignore my subtle griefs, succeeding so far in that I become more and more of a thorough materialist every day, loving bodily ease, appetizing food, costly wine, and personal indulgence to a degree that robbed me gradually of even the desire for mental effort. I taught myself, moreover, almost insensibly to accept and tolerate that I knew of a woman's side of my wife's character. True, I respected her less than the Turk respects the creature of his harem, but like the Turk, I took a certain savage satisfaction in being the possessor of her beauty, and with this feeling and the brute passion it engendered, I was fain to be content, so that for a short time at least, the drowsy satisfaction of a well-fed, well-mated animal was mine. I fancied that nothing short of stupendous financial catastrophe to the country itself could exhaust my stock of cash, and that therefore there was no necessity for me to exert myself in any particular branch of usefulness, but simply to eat and drink and be merry, as Solomon advised. Intellectual activity was paralyzed in me. To take up my pen and write and make another and higher bid for fame was an idea that now never entered my mind. I spent my days in ordering about my servants and practicing the petty pleasures of tyranny on gardeners and grooms, and in generally giving myself airs of importance mingled with an assumption of toleration and benevolence for the benefit of all those in my employ. I knew the proper thing to do well enough. I had not studied the ways of the over-wealthy for nothing. I was aware that the rich man never feels so thoroughly virtuous, as when he has inquired after the health of his coachman's wife and has sent her a couple of pounds for the outfit for her new baby. The much prated of kindness of heart and generosity possessed by millionaires generally amounts to this kind of thing. And when, if idly strolling about my parklands, I happened to meet the small child of my lodge-keeper, and then there bestowed sixpence upon it, I almost felt as if I deserved a throne in heaven at the right hand of the Almighty. So great was my apparition of my own good nature. Sybil, however, never affected this sort of county magnate beneficence. She did nothing at all among our poor neighbours. The clergyman of the district unfortunately happened to let slip one day a few words to the effect that there was no great want of anything among the parishioners, owing to a continual kindness and attention of Miss Clare. And Sybil never from that moment proffered any assistance. And then she took her graceful person into Lily Cottage, and sat with its happy and studious occupant for an hour. And occasionally the fair author herself came and dined with us, or had afternoon tea under the branching elms of the lawn. But even I, intense egotist as I was, could see that Mavis was scarcely herself on those occasions. She was always charming and bright, of course. Indeed, the only times in which I was able to partially forget myself and be absurdly increasingly importance of my personality in my own esteem were when she, with her sweet voice and animated manner, brought her wide knowledge of books, men, and things to bear on the conversation, thus raising it to a higher level than was ever reached by my wife or me. Yet I now and then noticed a certain vague constraint about her, and her frank eyes had frequently pained and questioning look of trouble when they rested for any length of time on the enchanting beauty of Sybil's face and form. I, however, paid little heed for those little trifling matters. My whole care was to lose myself more and more utterly in the enjoyment of purely physical ease and comfort without troubling myself as to what such self-absorption might lead to in the future. To be completely without a conscience, without a heart, and without sentiments was, I perceived, the best way to keep one's appetite and preserve one's own health. To go about worrying over the troubles of other people, to put oneself out to do any good in the world, would involve such an expenditure of time and trouble as must inevitably spoil one's digestion. And I saw that no millionaire or even moderately rich man cares to run the risk of injuring his digestion for the sake of performing a kindness to the poor fellow creature. Profiting by the examples presented to me everywhere in society, I took care of my digestion, and was particular about the way in which my meals were cooked and served, particular, too, as to the fashion in which my wife dressed for those meals, for it suited my supreme humour to see her beauty bedecked as suitably and richly as possible, that I might have the satisfaction of considering her points with the same Epicurean fastidiousness as I considered dish truffles, or specially prepared game. I never thought of the stern and absolute law, unto whom much is given, even from him should much be required. I was scarcely aware of it, in fact. The New Testament was all books in the world the most unfamiliar to me. And while I willfully deafened myself to the voice of conscience, that voice which ever and anon urged me in vain and nobler existence, the clouds were gathering ready to burst above me with that terrific suddenness, such as always seems to us who refuse to study the causes of our calamities. as astonishing and startling as death itself, for we are always more or less startled at death, notwithstanding that it is the commonest occurrence known. Towards the middle of September, my royal and distinguished house party arrived and stayed at Willowsmere Court for a week. Of course, it is understood that whenever the Prince of Wales honours any private residence with a visit he selects, if not all, at any rate the greater part of those persons who are to be invited to meet him. He did so in the present instance, and I was placed in an odd position of having to entertain certain people whom I had never met before, and who, with the questionable taste frequently exhibited among the upper ten, looked upon me as merely the man with millions, the caterer for their provisions, and no more, directing their chief attention to Sybil, who was by virtue of her birth and associations one of their set, and pushing me, their host, more or less into the background. However, the glory of entertaining royalty more than sufficed for my poor pride at the time, and with less self-respect than an honest cur, I was content to be snubbed and harassed and worried 100 times a day by one or other of the great personages who wandered at will all over my house and grounds, and accepted my lavish hospitality. Many people imagine that it must be an honor to entertain a select party of aristocrats, but I, on the contrary, consider that it is not only degradation to one's manlier and more independent instincts, but also a bore. These highly bred, highly connected individuals are, for the most part, unintelligent and devoid of resources in their own minds. They are not gifted as conversationalists or wits. One gains no intellectual advantage from their society. They are simply dull folk with an exaggerated sense of their own importance, who, except wherever they go, to be amused without trouble to themselves. Out of all the visitors at Willowsmere, the only one whom it was really a pleasure to entertain was the Prince of Wales himself. And amid the many personal irritations I had to suffer from others, I found it a positive relief to render him any attention, however slight, because his manner was always marked by that tact and courtesy which are the best attributes of a true gentleman, whether he be prince or peasant. In his own genial way, he went one afternoon to see Mavis Clare, and came back in high good humour, talking for some time of nothing but the author of Differences and of the success she had achieved in literature. I had asked Mavis to join our party before the prince came, as I felt pretty sure he would not have erased her name from the list of guests submitted to him, but she would not accept, and begged me very earnestly not to press the point. I like the prince, she said. Everybody likes him. Who knows him, but I do not always like the people who surround him. Pardon me for my frankness. The Prince of Wales is a social magnate. He draws after him all who by dint of wealth, if not intelligence, can contrive to push into him set. Now, I am not an advocate of push. Moreover, I do not care to be seen with everybody. This is my sinful pride, you will say, or as our American cousins would put it, my cussedness. But I assure you, Mr. Tempest, the best possession I have, and one which I value a great deal more even than my literary success, is my absolute independence, and I would not have it thought, even erroneously, that I am anxious to mix with a crowd of sycophants and time-servers who are only too ready to take advantage of the prince's good nature. And acting upon her determination, she had remained more than ever secluded in her cottage nest of foliage and flowers during the progress of the week's festivities, the result being, as I have stated, that the prince dropped in upon her quite casually one day, accompanied by his equerry, and probably, for all I knew, had the pleasures of seeing the Dove reviewers being fed and squabbling over their meal. Much as we had desired the presence of Ximenes at our gathering, he did not appear. He telegraphed his regrets from Paris and followed the telegram by a characteristic letter which ran thus: My dear Tempest, you are very kind to wish to include me, your old friend, in the party you have invited to meet His Royal Highness, and I only hope you will not think me churlish for refusing to come. I am sick to death of royalties. I have known so many of them in the course of my existence that I begin to find their society monotonous. Their positions are all so exactly alike too, and moreover, have always been alike from the days of Solomon in all his glory, down to the present blessed era of Victoria, Queen and Empress. One thirsts for a change, at least I do. The only monarch that ever fascinated my imagination particularly was Richard Coeur de Lion. There was something original and striking about that man, and I presume he would have been well worth talking to. And Charlemagne was, doubtless, as the slangy young man of the day would observe, not half bad. But for the rest, en ficole. Much talk is there made about Her Majesty Elizabeth, who was a shrew and a vixen and bloodthirsty with all. The chief glory of her reign was Shakespeare, and he made kings and queens dancing puppets for his thought. In this, though, in nothing else, I resemble him. You will have enough to do in the entertainment of your distinguished guests, for I suppose there is no amusement they have not tried and found more or less unsatisfactory. And I am sorry I cannot suggest nothing particularly new. I can suggest nothing particularly new for you to do. Her Grace, the Duchess of Rapidryre, is very fond of being tossed in strong tablecloth between four able-bodied gentlemen of good birth and discretion before going to bed of nights. She cannot very well appear on the music hall stage, you know, owing to her exalted rank. And this is a childlike, pretty and harmless method of managing to show her legs, which she rightly considers are too shapely to be hidden. Lady Bounce, whose name I see in your list, always likes to cheat at cards. I would aid and abet her in her aim, if I were you, as if she can only clear her dressmaker's bill by her winnings at Willowsmere. She will bear it in mind and be a useful social friend to you. The Honourable Miss Fitzgander, who has a great reputation for virtue, is anxious for presenting and particular reasons to marry Lord Noodles. If you can move on matters between them into a definite engagement of marriage before her lady mother returns from her duty in Scotland, you will be doing her a good turn and saving society a scandal. To amuse the men, I suggest plenty of shooting, gambling, and unlimited smoking. To entertain the prince, do little, for he is clever enough to entertain himself privately with the folly and humbug of those he sees around him, without actually sharing in the petri comedy. He is a keen observer, and must derive infinite gratification from his constant study of men and manners, which is sufficiently deep and searching to fit him for the occupation of even the throne of England. I say even, for at present, till time's great hour, glass turns, it is the grandest throne in the world. The prince reads, understands, and secretly laughs to scorn the tablecloth vagaries of the Duchess of Rapidryre, the humours of my Lady Bounce, and the nervous pruderies of the Honourable Miss Fitzgander, and there is nothing he will appreciate so much in his reception as lack of toadyism, insincere demeanour, an unostentatious hospitality, a simplicity of speech, and a total absence of affection. Remember this, and take my advice for what it is worth. Of all the royalties at present flourishing on this paltry planet, I have the greatest respect for the Prince of Wales, and it is by reason of this very respect that I do not intend, on this occasion, to thrust myself upon his notice. I shall arrive at Willowsmere when your royal festivities are over. My homage to your fair spouse, The Lady Sybil, and believe me, yours as long as you desire it, Lucio Jimenez. I laughed over this letter and showed it to my wife, who did not laugh. She read it through with the closeness of attention that somewhat surprised me, and when she laid it down, there was a strange look of pain in her eyes. How he despises us all, she said slowly. What scorn underlies his words. Do you not recognize it? He was always a cynic, I replied indifferently. I never expect him to be anything less. He seems to know some of the ways of women who are coming here, she went on in the same musing accents. It is as if he read their thoughts and perceived their intentions at a distance. Her brows knitted frowningly, and she seemed for some time absorbed in gloomy meditation. But I did not peruse the subject. I was too intent on my own fussy preparations for the prince's arrival to care about anything else. And as I have said, royalty, in the person of one of the most affable men, came and went gracefully through the whole program devised for this entertainment, and then departed again with his usual courteous acknowledgments for the hospitality offered and accepted, leaving us, as he very often leaves everybody, charmed with his good humor, provided that nothing has ruffled it. When, with his exit from the scene, the whole party broke up, leaving my wife and me to our own two selves once more. There came a strange silence and desolation over the house that was like the stealthy sense of some approaching calamity. Sybil seemed to feel it as much as I did, and though we said nothing to each other concerning our mutual sensations, I could see that she was under the same cloud of depression as myself. She went oftener to Lily Cottage, and always from these visits to the fair-haired student among the roses came back, I hopefully fancied, in a softer mood. Her very voice was gentler, her eyes more thoughtful than tender. One evening she said, "I've been thinking, Geoffrey, that perhaps there is some good in life after all, if I could only find it out and live it. But you are the last person to help me in such a matter." I was sitting in an armchair near the open window smoking, and I turned my eyes upon her with some astonishment and a touch of indignation. "What do you mean, Sybil?" I asked. "Surely you know that I have the greatest desire to see you always in your best aspect. Many of your ideas have been most repugnant to me." "Stop there," she said quickly, her eyes flashing as she spoke. "My ideas have been repugnant to you, you say? What have you done, you as my husband, to change those ideas? Have you not the same base passions as I, and do you not give way to them so basely? What have I seen in you from day to day that I should take you as an example? You are master here, and you rule with all arrogance wealth can give. You eat, drink, and sleep. You entertain your acquaintances simply that you may astonish them by the excess of luxury in which you indulge. You read and smoke, shoot and ride, and there an end. You are an ordinary, not an exceptional man. Do you trouble to ask what is wrong with me? Do you try, with patience of great love, to set before me the noble aims than those I have consciously or unconsciously imbibed? Do you try to lead me, an erring, passionate, misguided woman, into what I dream of as the light of faith and hope, which alone gives peace?" And suddenly, burying her head in the pillows of the couch on which she leaned, she broke into a fit of smothered weeping. I drew my cigar from my mouth and stared at her helplessly. It was about an hour after dinner, and a warm, soft, autumnal evening. I had eaten and drunk well, and I was drowsy and heavy-brained. "Dear me," I murmured. "You seem so very unreasonable, Sybil. I suppose you are hysterical." She sprang up from the couch, her tears dried on her cheeks, as though by sheer heat of her crimson glow that flushed them, and she laughed wildly. "Yes, that's it," she exclaimed. "Hysteria, nothing else. It is accountable for everything that moves a woman's nature." A woman has no right to have any emotions that cannot be cured by smelling salts. Heartache, pooh. Cut her stay lace. Despair and sense of sin and misery, nonsense. Bathe her temples with vinegar. An uneasy conscience? Ah, for an uneasy conscience there is nothing better than sal volatile. Woman is a toy, a breakable fool's toy, and when she is broken, throw her aside and have her done away with. Don't try to piece her together, the fragile rubbish. She ceased abruptly, panting for breath, and before I could collect my thoughts or find any words wherewith to reply, a tall shadow suddenly darkened the embrasure of the window, and a familiar voice inquired, "May I, with the privilege of friendship, enter unannounced?" I started up. "Remenez," I cried, seizing him by the hand. "Nay, Geoffrey, my homage is due here first," he replied, shaking off my grasp and advancing to Sybil, who stood perfectly still, where she had risen up in strange passion. "Lady Sybil, am I welcome?" "Can you ask it?" she said, with an enchanting smile and a voice from which all harshness and excitement had fled. "More than welcome." Here she gave him both her hands, which she respectfully kissed. "You cannot imagine how much I have longed to see you again. I must apologize for my sudden appearance, Geoffrey," and then observed, turning to me, "but as I walked here from the station and came up to your fine avenue of trees, I was so struck with the loveliness of this place and the exquisite peace of its surroundings that, knowing my way through the grounds, I thought I would just look about and see if you were anywhere within sight before I presented myself at the conventional door of entrance. And I was not disappointed. I found you, as I expected, enjoying each other's society, the happiest and most fortunate couple existent, people whom, out of all the world, I should be disposed to envy, if I envied worldly happiness at all, which I do not." I glanced at him quickly. He met my gaze with a perfectly unembarrassed air, and I concluded that he had not overheard Sybil's sudden melodramatic outburst. "Have you dined?" I asked, with my hand on the bell. "Thanks, yes. The town of Leamington provided me with quite sumptuous repast of bread and cheese and ale. I am tired of luxuries, you know. That is why I find plain fare delicious. You are looking wonderfully well, Geoffrey. Shall I offend you if I say you are growing, yes, positively stout, with a stoutness befitting of a true county gentleman, who means to be as gouty in the future as his respectable ancestors?" I smiled, but not altogether with pleasure. It is never agreeable to be called stout in the presence of a beautiful woman to whom one has only been wedded a matter of 3 months. "You have not put on any extra flesh," I said, by the way of feeble retort. "No," he admitted, as he disposed his slim, elegant figure in the armchair near my own. "The necessary quantity of flesh is a bore to me, always. Extra flesh would be a positive infliction. I should like, as the irreverent, though reverend, Sidney Smith said on a hot day, to sit in my bones, or rather to become a spirit of fine essence like Shakespeare's Ariel, if such things were possible and permissible. How admirably married life agrees with you, Lady Sybil." His fine eyes rested upon her apparent admiration. She flushed under his gaze, I saw, and seemed confused. "When did you arrive in England?" she inquired. "Yesterday," he answered. "I ran over Channel from Honfleur in my yacht." "You did not know I had a yacht, did you, Tempest? Oh, you must come for a trip in her some day. She's a quick vessel, and weather was fair." "Is Amiel with you?" I asked. "No, I left him aboard the yacht. I can, as common people say, valet myself for the day or two." "A day or two," echoed Sybil. "But you surely will not leave us so soon." "You promised to make us a long visit here." "Oh, did I?" And he regarded her steadily with the same languorous admiration in his eyes. "But my dear Lady Sybil, time alters our ideas, and I am not sure whether you and your excellent husband are of the same opinion as you were when you started on your wedding tour. You may not want me now," he said with a significance to which I paid no heed whatsoever. Not want you, I exclaimed. I shall always want you, Lucio. You are the best friend I ever had, and the only one I care to keep. Believe me, there's my hand upon it. He looked at me curiously for a minute, then turned his head towards my wife. And what does Lady Sybil say? He asked in a gentle, almost caressing tone. Lady Sybil says, she answered with a smile, and the colour coming and going in her cheeks, that she will be proud and glad if you will consider Willowsmere your home as long as you have leisure to make it so, and that she hopes, though you are reputed to be a hater of women, here she raised her beautiful eyes and fixed them full upon him, you relent a little in favour of your present chatelaine. With these words and playful salutation, she passed out of the room into the garden and stood in the lawn at the little distance from us, her white robes shimmering in the mellow autumnal twilight, and Lucio, springing up from his seat, looked after her, clapping his hand down heavily on my shoulder. By heaven, he said softly, a perfect woman I should be a churl to withstand her. Or you, my good Geoffrey, and he regarded me earnestly. I have led a very devil of a life since I saw you last. It's time I reformed upon my soul, it is. The peaceful contemplation of virtuous marriage will do me good. Send for my luggage for the station, Geoffrey, and make the best of me. I've come to stay. And that is where we end for the evening. That was a little bit of a long chapter, but it was there. If you are enjoying it, my loves, a great way of saying thank you is to support the channel. The likes and comments, shares are great. If you can afford it, I would appreciate it if you could chip in a few dollars to my Patreon at the Gentleman Psychic. Patreon.com/The Gentleman Psychic. You can also find it on my PayPal at rlillard6@gmail.com. Venmo is a great way of supporting the channel too, and that is Richard-Lale Lillard. And with that, my lovelies, I look forward to seeing you. We've got just that much left of the book, and I will start doing some readings on Facebook again, because we are entering the Halloween season. Though I will tell you, my October season is quite busy. I will be in Salem. I will be in oh goodness, I don't know, but it's every weekend is going to be rather busy. Anyway, my loves, thank you for joining me this long. It is now 11:11 here on the East Coast. I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.